We are told by the sages that we shall cease to identify ourselves with these bodies and thus be free once for all from the sufferings that come through them, only when we attain direct experience of the real self. Just as we now have direct experience of the body as the self, so we must have direct experience of that self as it really is. This ignorance is an ingrained habit of thought, which has been bred in the mind through a long course of wrong acting and thinking. Out of it have arisen numerous attachments to things. These thought habits form the very structure of the mind, and the mere introduction of a contrary thought, which is a very weak one, just like a newly born infant, will make very little difference. The mind will still flow along the same habit channels. It will still be subject to the same attractions and repulsions. And this will be so because while it may be possible for the book-learned philosopher to be able to feel at times that he is not the body, he cannot with equal facility come to feel that he is not the mind. And this double ignorance will cease only when the self is known, not theoretically, but practically, by direct experience of the self. Until that realization dawns, the philosopher cannot be said to have thrown off his ignorance. It survives in all its vigor. His philosophical lore does not even make any difference in his character. In fact, as the sage points out, the book-taught philosopher is even worse off than other men. His egoism is swelled by the pride of knowledge, even though it's theoretical, worldly knowledge. His heart is beset with new attachments, from which the illiterate are free, which leave him no time for the enterprise of finding the real self. Often he is even unaware of the very urgent necessity of preparing himself for that quest by harmonizing the contents of his mind and directing its energies towards the self instead of the world. Hence it follows that he that knows the self from books alone knows it no more than humbler folk. For this reason, the sage likens the intellectual to a gramophone. He is no better for his book lore than the gramophone is for the good things it repeats. Books, we should remember, are no more than signposts on the road to the wisdom that makes us free. That wisdom is not in the books themselves. For the self that we need to know is within, not outside. If and when the eye of wisdom is opened, the self will be found shining in all its glory, directly, without any medium. But the study of books engenders the notion that the self is something outside, needing to be known as an object through the medium of the mind. The vast confusion that prevails is philosophical and theological speculations, says the sage, due to ignorance. Everyone is fully persuaded that the abstruse questions concerning the world, the soul, and God can be settled finally and satisfactorily by intellectual speculation sustained by arguments drawn from common human experience, which is what it is because of this ignorance. Philosophers and theologians have disputed from the very beginning of creation, if there was a creation, about the first cause, the mode of creation, the nature of time and space, the truth or otherwise of the world, the conflict of fate and free will, the state of deliverance, and so on without end. But no finality has been reached. And so the sage of Arunachala explains to us that there can be no final conclusion, such that it cannot be upset by new or seemingly new arguments advanced by fresh disputants, unless and until the real self is realized. For him that has realized that self, these controversies come to an end. But for others, they must continue. unless they hearken to the advice of the sage, which is to the effect that they should leave all these questions on one side and devote themselves wholeheartedly to the quest of the self. Either we must accept the teachings of the sages on these matters, at least tentatively, so that we shall no more be diverted from the quest by these disputes, or we should recognize the profound truth that these questions are of no importance at all and need no answer, that the one thing needed is to find the self. For these questions arise, if at all, only to those that look upon the mind or the body as the self. We thus understand that all our sufferings are due to our ignorance of the real self. This ignorance must be removed if we are ever to enjoy real happiness. For removal of the cause is the only radical cure there is. All else is only palliative treatment, which may even do harm in the long run by actually adding to the disease. And we can get rid of this ignorance only by direct experience of the self. This is no easy task, for the instrument by which we must work at is the mind. It has to be turned aside from all else and towards the true self. But the mind does not readily turn aside from its customary preoccupations. If forcibly turned aside, it does not stay so, but soon turns back to them. This is because the mind is full of notions, which are the progeny of this ignorance. And these notions naturally rise up in arms to defend the life of their parent, this ignorance. For its life is also their life. We have therefore to liquidate all these notions. Because these notions are the progeny of this primary ignorance, they are presumably false. And it stands to reason that false knowledge is inimical to the dawn of the truth. Therefore, also, it is needful for us to examine these notions and reject them if they are found to be incorrect, or even if only doubtful. Thus alone shall we be secure against traitorous outbreaks behind us when we are engaged in the quest for the real self. In this examination, we must be guided by absolute devotion to the truth. As the Bhagavad Gita tells us, he that loves the truth and subdues his whole being to the love of the truth shall find it. This condition is very important. Surely there can be no partial love of the truth. Such love implies a love of untruth in greater or less degree. Perfect love of the truth means a perfect readiness to renounce whatever shall be found to be untrue as a result of an impartial examination, inquiry. It also implies ability to submit to a thorough examination all the beliefs we now have about the world, the soul, and God, without attachment to those beliefs. It is the mark of the truth lover that he is no more attached to his own beliefs than those of others. He holds those beliefs tentatively and can calmly contemplate the possibility of finding that they are untenable and worthy to be renounced. It is the freedom from attachment to one's own beliefs that enables him to make an impartial examination of their validity. And if, as a result of such examination, he finds that they are invalid, he not only renounces them, but is ever on his guard against their possible return until they lose their power on him. Therefore, we must see to it that we shall be devoted to the truth and the truth alone, untainted by errors. And for its sake, we must renounce the love we bear to our present beliefs, so that the truth may reign supreme in our hearts when we have found it. What is known as philosophy is just this impartial scrutiny of all our notions, of the entire contents of our minds. This alone is true philosophy, where it meets self-inquiry. All else is pseudo-philosophy, and it is safe to say that pseudo-philosophers are those who have either not understood the fact they are ignorant of the self, or are quite content to remain in subjection to that ignorance. We shall now consider how to make sure that in our philosophizing, we shall avoid the pitfalls that lurk in our path and arrive at notions which shall not be inimical to our pursuit of the quest for the true self.